So today I just want to show you how I transfer an embroidery design onto this, which is water soluble fleece stabilizer. It's usually used with machine embroidery, but it works brilliantly for hand embroidery as well, especially on knitting. And as you can see, once you lay it down on top of a normal printed out piece of A4 paper, you can see straight through it. So the simplest thing to do is, once you've printed out your design, just get a normal HB writing pencil with a sharp but not too sharp point, and holding your stabilizer nice and still and nice and flat, just trace it. The important thing to remember is that a few little deviances here and there are not a problem at all. The way that the embroidery sits on top of your knitting, the way that you work your individual stitches both in the knitting and the embroidery, all of these things are going to affect exactly how your embroidery comes out. But a perfect replica of what's printed on this piece of paper is not the goal. The goal is just something beautiful. And beautiful is very rarely carbon copied. So I'm going to stop talking, honest, so that I can speed this up in the edit. Okay, so once you've drawn everything, just lift it up and double check you haven't missed anything. You can see when I hold it over the white of the paper, you can see that nice and clearly. So yeah, we're looking good. That's all there is to it. The next thing I will do is lay this on top of my knitting and just sew around the edge to hold it in place. And then I will pop it into a hoop and start embroidering. So as you can see, I've now tacked down the fleece, and it's still not perfectly flat and attached, but that's okay. The important thing is to keep an eye on the small sections as we're working. This is mostly to attach it, to help me get the hoop on without them shifting too much, and so I can pop it on and have a look and make sure that I'm happy with the placement. So it's time to start the actual embroidery. We are all set up in our hoop, everything is ready to go. I am going to use some 4-ply weight yarn from Jamieson & Smith to embroider this, just because I want it to be really accessible for people who haven't embroidered on knitwear before, and I thought you're all far more likely to have some leftover 4-ply knocking around than you are to have a massive range of embroidery floss to choose from. And also, buying something that you're not used to can be a bit intimidating, and again, I really wanted everyone to be able to have a go at this one if they wanted to. So I have gone for Jamieson & Smith 2-ply jumper weight, which is 4-ply or fingering weight overall. It's pretty rustic, it's 100% wool, but you could use hand dyed if that's what you've got. You can use sock yarn. It's not too important. The only thing I would say is have a little go at doing some embroidery on your swatch first and make sure that the colours don't run, especially if, like me, you have gone for whiter than white. Okay, other things I'm going to be using include a needle threader, because this yarn is pretty thick, and some needles. I'm using chenille needles from Merchant & Mills to embroider on this. and I can show you. They come in different sizes. Now, for embroidering on knitting using yarn like this, you're going to want to make sure this is thicker than embroidery floss usually is. So you need to make sure that the eye, that's the hole in the end of your needle, is big enough for your yarn to go through. This eye, please focus nicely, camera. This eye is big enough. That one will be fine. Some of these look a little thin. So I'm looking for a longer needle with a bigger eye, and they're all the same length actually. So I'm going to grab that one that I found before that looks good. Stick it through my yarn for now while I put the rest away, because obviously tipping out a bunch of pointy needles was an excellent way to start this. It's fine. Okay, they're all safely away. So in terms of the order, I'm going to start with some leaves, partly because they're in the middle, and also because this is the part I found trickiest to embroider when I did my practice swatch. So I want to do it first, so that if I decide I'm not happy with it and want to rip it out and start again, I don't have to worry about messing up anything else. The official instructions or guide for embroidery is to do the background stuff first and then do the prominent stuff last. I haven't seen any explanations for why. I think it's so that if you're doing the foreground stuff, you can go over and get really pristine lines at the end. But honestly, for this one, it doesn't matter too much because it's kind of an all over motif. There's not much foreground, background division going on. So start wherever you feel comfortable. Okay, got my needle, got some yarn. Now, when it comes to the amount of yarn you need, I do not recommend looking at the pattern, seeing how many yards or meters you need, and then putting that much on your needle all at once. The longer the length of yarn you have attached to your needle, the more likely you are to create knots as you're working, and knots are a problem because they make your work messy and difficult. So as you do more embroidery, you will work out what a comfortable length of yarn for you to work with is. What I would say is, do not worry about how many joins you have on the back of your work. That's the back of your work. It's the front that matters. I've forgotten my scissors. I'll be right back. Okay, I think I kicked the stand a bunch of times doing that, so sorry about that. If you want to see how much yarn I am putting on my needle, it is about this much. I haven't really measured it in any way. I wrapped it around my fingers about 12 times, and just eyeballing it, I know it's going to feel a bit long at first, but then it will be fine. So if you're not a sewist at all, this is how you use a needle threader. You pop this thin bit here on the end, which is really hard to show on camera, through the eye of the needle. Oh, blimey. There we go. Then you pass the yarn through the threader and then pull the threader through the needle. And the idea is that this bit here is so much bigger than the eye of the needle, it's much easier to do. That simple. So for this design, we are working with single thread for the leaves. And we know I'm doing the leaves because I've got green yarn. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to arrange the needle on the yarn so that the tail ends, of which there are two, so that one of them is just a little bit shorter than the other. Can you see that? And then I'm going to pull through and get the needle where it needs to be, like that. And the reason why I'm doing that is just so that as much of the yarn as possible is doubled up, because that means the working length of it is shorter and I'm less likely to make mistakes and get knots. There's a pro tip for you. Right, big reminder, you are only working through the front of the jumper that's in the hoop. Do not go through the back of the jumper or a sleeve or anything else at the same time. You want to be really careful to do that. You may find it easier to knit the front of the jumper and then before seaming up the sides and knitting the sleeves, stop and do the embroidery and then carry on. That's absolutely fine if you want to do it that way. I haven't, just because I needed to take photos of the jumper totally finished with no embroidery on it, so I didn't have that option, but you do. So if you want to do that and make your life a tiny bit easier, go for it. Okay, so we start embroidery on the back of the work. So what I'm going to do is pass the needle up the bottom of the jumper and rest my needle hand behind the work. And you can see this is my finger tapping through. And what I find is a really good trick, my hand that's holding the needle does not know where the design on this is. Like, my body does not have an intuitive knowledge of where other things are in the world. What it does have is an intuitive knowledge of where other body parts are. If I put my finger here, I can very accurately stab myself with it through the back if I want to. I don't want to, but if you put your finger next to where you want to be, then the hand that's underneath will find it much easier to find where you need to go. And what you can do is every time you pop the needle up, just make sure that it's exactly where you want it to be. And if it isn't, just take it back down again. So for these leaves, the way I've been doing them is to start at the tip of the leaf. They're not very pointy leaves, but I'm calling it the tip. There. Right in the middle. Once that needle's through, I can bring my hand back up to the top. I've actually got my left hand underneath, and the yarn underneath is passing between two fingers on my left hand before coming through the jumper and the top. And what that will let me do is my left hand will feel when the two threads become one, and I'll know to slow down on the tugging so I don't tug it all the way through by mistake. There we go. So what I can do now is flip it over and look and see my tail here, see how much of it there is, and just very gently pull it through a bit more. And what I'm going to do now is, as I work the first few stitches, my left hand is just going to keep hold of that tail to make sure I don't pull it all the way through. And what I'm also doing is I'm using my fingers on my left hand to push the knitting gently against the fleece so that I know everything is tight. Okay, so I've come up here at the tip of the leaf, and what I'm going to do now is go back down at the very tip of the line down the middle of the leaf, the stem. Is that called the stem? Probably. Once that's through in the right place, right hand goes under to pull through, and once again it's going up against my fingers on my left hand so I can feel what's going as much as I can see it. Okay, and there we have one strand, our first satin stitch. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is come up just to the left of that stitch on the edge. Pull the yarn through. Oh, and there we go. That didn't take long, did it? We have a little knot on the back. Don't panic when you see knots. You can usually just undo them because it's not an actual pulled tight knot. It's just the yarn getting itself in a tiz. And we can carry on pulling that through. There we go. What you don't ever want to do is force a knot because that will make big holes that you don't really want. Okay, so now I'm going back down in the exact same place as the first stitch. And this time if a knot forms, it will be on the top of my work so I can see what I'm doing. Knots on the front are much easier to avoid, you'll be pleased to know, as you can see them coming. Okay, so you can see I'm not pulling the yarn ridiculously tight. It's snug but not tight, because remember this jumper's already been blocked, so it's already the right size and we don't want to pucker and pull it in. So now I'm coming up on the right hand side. coming all the way through. And what I'm doing here is I'm just looking at my edge and making sure I'm making a nice neat line there. Not entirely happy with where that last stitch has come up, but I think it's close enough. Because remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so I've done the first ones there. What I'm going to do now is keep coming up on the left and down in the middle, and then up on the right and down in the middle. And when I go down in the middle from the left hand side, I'll move ever so slightly down here, down this line here. And when I come down from the right hand side, I'll go into the same hole as from the left. And what that will do is create kind of a V design like this, all the way down, and it'll make it look really nice and leafy.